They thought she was just emotional. They thought her tears were a sign of weakness, her silence an indication of defeat. They looked at her and saw fragility. What they didn't know was that the fire inside her had been burning quietly for years. Pain was not new to her. She had known it in the quiet hours of the night when the world slept and she lay awake, battling the chaos in her mind and the heaviness in her heart. They saw the smile, but they didn't see the weight behind it. They saw the strength, but they didn't know what it cost. She wasn't born resilient. She became that way through betrayal, abandonment, rejection, and loss, through disappointment that made her question her worth, through seasons where she had to be her own comfort, her own shoulder, her own cheerleader. The world told her to be strong, but never gave her space to be soft. So she tucked away her tears and walked with grace, even when her legs trembled under the weight of everything she carried. She was not the same woman she once was, and that was the point. The girl who used to break at the sound of harsh words evolved into the woman who now walks away from disrespect without explanation. The one who once begged for love now realizes her love is not something to be handed out recklessly. The one who clung to relationships out of fear of being alone now finds peace in her own company. Every heartbreak sculpted her. Every goodbye taught her boundaries. Every silent prayer in the dark built the foundation of the woman she is today. She had learned to stop chasing what wasn't chasing her. The pain had taught her that loving herself was not selfish, it was survival. The wounds once wide open now held stories, not scars. And though she still carried the memories, she no longer let them define her. She looked in the mirror and finally saw someone she respected. Not because she had never fallen, but because she rose every single time. There were days when her knees hit the floor and her soul cried out for mercy. There were days when no one checked on her, when no one noticed she was drowning beneath her responsibilities. Yet she never gave up. She showed up for her job, for her children, for her loved ones, often with a heart that felt like it was breaking. But even in those moments, she pushed through. Not because she had to prove anything to anyone, but because something deep inside whispered, "You were not built to quit." Her pain became her compass. It pointed her to truth. It revealed who was really in her corner and who only showed up when it benefited them. It taught her that not everyone deserves access to her softness, that not everyone who claims to love her knows how to protect her heart. So she started closing doors, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She no longer explained her absence. She no longer justified her boundaries. She had evolved beyond the need for validation. The fire in her didn't come from ease. It came from endurance. It came from nights she didn't think she'd survive, but did. It came from the battles no one saw, the prayers whispered through tears, the dreams she refused to bury. She didn't seek revenge. She chose growth. She didn't return what was thrown at her. She turned it into fuel. They threw doubt, and she built determination. They threw lies, and she found truth. They threw distance, and she found herself. She had stopped performing for people who only clapped when it was convenient. She had stopped giving to those who only knew how to take. She knew now that peace was more valuable than attention, that solitude was more healing than shallow company. And while she still loved deeply, she did so with wisdom. She no longer gave all of herself to those who couldn't handle her depth. She loved from overflow, not emptiness. She learned to be her own safe space. She discovered that her own arms could be the warmest embrace, that her own words could be the most comforting, that silence could be sacred, not scary. She began to sit with herself and actually listen to the pain, the desires, the dreams long buried. She began to nurture what was once neglected, her own needs, her own joy, her own healing. Pain didn't destroy her, it awakened her. It taught her what strength really means. Not the kind that wears a mask and says, "I'm fine" when everything is falling apart, but the kind that says, "I'm not okay, but I'm still standing. The kind that knows healing isn't linear, that some days progress looks like getting out of bed, that crying doesn't make her weak, it cleanses the soul, that sometimes the most powerful thing she can do is rest. She no longer romanticized struggle. She no longer thought suffering was proof of love. She realized that she didn't need to bleed for anyone to prove her loyalty. She didn't need to carry other people's burdens at the expense of her own health. She understood now that saying no was an act of self-respect, not rebellion. That walking away didn't mean she failed. It meant she chose herself. She began to smile again. Not the forced kind, but the one that came from peace. She laughed again, not because life was perfect, but because she no longer allowed pain to steal her joy. She danced in her kitchen, sang in her car, and reclaimed the little moments that made her feel alive. She had cried enough. Now it was time to live. Not just survive, live. She started dreaming again. She picked up the broken pieces and built something beautiful, a new life, one where her voice mattered, where her dreams weren't on the back burner, where her heart was no longer sacrificed on the altar of other people's comfort. She no longer shrunk herself to fit into spaces that couldn't handle her fullness. She took up space, boldly and unapologetically. The people who once underestimated her watched in silence. She wasn't seeking revenge, but her growth spoke louder than any words ever could. She became a force, not because she wanted to prove a point, but because she had finally realized she was the point. That she didn't need to be chosen to be worthy, that her value was never tied to someone's inability to see it. She embraced her past, not to dwell, but to honor it, to acknowledge how far she'd come, to remember that every breakdown birthed a breakthrough, that every ending carried the seed of a beginning. She didn't regret the pain, she just refused to carry it any longer. She laid it down like a heavy coat she had outgrown. Her softness was still there, but it was guarded. Her heart still loved, but it was wiser now. Her soul still hoped, but with discernment. She didn't rush anymore. She moved with intention. She didn't chase anymore. She attracted what matched her spirit. She didn't beg anymore. She blessed herself. She didn't wait for someone to rescue her. She rescued herself. There is nothing more powerful than a woman who has been through pain and still chooses to rise, who has every reason to shut down but still shows up with light in her eyes, who has been disappointed but still believes in love, who has been alone but never lets loneliness define her, who has cried in secret but stands in public like royalty. Her evolution was not loud, but it was undeniable. She carried herself differently now. There was a sacred stillness about her, a wisdom that couldn't be learned from books, only from battles, a quiet confidence that didn't need to boast. She had been forged in the fire, and now she glowed, not for attention, but because her soul had healed. Her voice, once silenced, now carried weight, not just in words, but in presence. They didn't understand how she kept going. They didn't see the inner work, the nights she journaled her pain into poetry, the days she spoke affirmations over her shattered self, the hours she spent alone, confronting her fears, facing her insecurities, forgiving herself for things she didn't deserve. They didn't see the roots, only the bloom, but she knew, and that was enough. She wasn't perfect. She still had moments of doubt, moments of aching, but they no longer consumed her. She had made peace with not having all the answers. She had stopped asking why and started trusting the timing of her life. She had stopped comparing her journey to others. She had stopped rushing healing. She learned to breathe through it all, to feel it all, to let go when it was time. She wasn't the same. She had become, and through pain, she had risen, not in spite of it, but because of it. Because a woman evolves through pain, not by staying broken, but by rebuilding, not by hiding her wounds, but by turning them into wisdom, not by seeking love from others, but by falling in love with herself. And in that sacred becoming, she doesn't just survive, she transforms. She steps into her divine power. She walks with grace, speaks with truth, and lives with purpose. And those who knew her before may no longer recognize her. But she isn't looking back. She isn't shrinking to fit old chapters. She is writing a new one now, with bold strokes, with unwavering clarity, with a heart that no longer fears its own strength. She is free. There is a moment, often quiet and unnoticed by the world, when everything changes. A moment not marked by fireworks or grand gestures, but by a subtle shift in the spirit. A woman who has spent years questioning her place, doubting her voice, and compromising her value suddenly wakes up. Not from sleep, but from illusion. The illusion that her worth was ever negotiable. The illusion that she needed permission to be powerful. The illusion that she had to earn love by shrinking, bending, or breaking. She doesn't scream it. She doesn't post about it. She doesn't seek applause, but something inside her has shifted and it cannot be undone. She starts moving differently, not because she's angry, but because she's aware. She speaks with precision, walks with presence, and chooses with discernment. No more chasing, no more convincing, no more explaining herself to those committed to misunderstanding her. She has seen the truth, and the truth has set her free. She remembers all the time she was overlooked, not because she lacked value, but because she had been offering it in places that couldn't see it. She thinks back to the nights she cried into pillows, wondering why she wasn't enough, why they left, why they stayed away, why they treated her like an option. But now she knows it was never about her being too much. It was about them not being enough to handle her. For years, she mistook tolerance for love. She accepted crumbs and called it a feast. She interpreted silence as peace and carried the weight of other people's indifference like a badge of endurance, but no more. The woman she is now refuses to confuse struggle with devotion. She has realized that love without respect is not love at all. That presence without effort is not commitment. That attention without depth is a performance, not intimacy. She stopped waiting for closure, for apologies, for someone to come and choose her in the way she deserves. She no longer holds her breath for messages that never come or explanations that wouldn't change anything. She lets go, not because it's easy, but because she deserves to breathe again, to live without the ache of waiting, to exist without the anxiety of being second-guessed. She is no longer fueled by proving herself. The woman who once needed to be seen now sees herself fully, clearly, tenderly. She looks in the mirror and finally recognizes the beauty that doesn't fade, the strength that doesn't shout, the depth that can't be measured. She no longer apologizes for her complexity, her emotion, her standards. If she is too much, they are free to go. She is not here to be diluted for anyone's comfort.